So let me welcome you all to Value of Words 20. This is the RST Forum edition of the Value of Words, where we are today discussing a very important topic of India-Nepal relationship, which in this year at least, along with the whole issue of corona has been one of the key topics for people living in this side of the border, especially in the mountain areas, who have direct links with the India Nepal through the borders as well as the other people to people relationship. So let me welcome you all. My name is Krishan Singh Rautela. I am the member of Integrated Mountain Initiative and Sustainable Development Forum Uttarakhand. Sustainable Development Forum Uttarakhand is one of the proponents for the RST Forum, which is named after Dr. R.S. Tolia. He was one of the founder members of the Integrated Mountain Initiative as well as the Sustainable Development Forum Uttarakhand. Our panel today includes Mr. Ranjit Rai, who has been a career diplomat and also one of the key persons who has been party to forming the new evolving relationship between India and the ambassador to Nepal also, and as well as the person who has made the peace treaty possible after the whole Mao's insurgency earlier. We have Sri N.S. Napalchalji, who is the again Indian Administrative Services personnel. He had served as the Chief Secretary of Uttarakhand and later in various other positions. He is also a councillor, governing council member of Sustainable Development Forum Uttarakhand. And then we have Sri Satyadeep Chetriji. He is from Sikkim. He is an academic professional, also at the same time a writer and also NGO activist who heads the organizations like Sati in Sikkim, and also he is a founder member of RMI. So I welcome you all. And today's discussion, we will initially have first round of presentations by each of the presenters, starting with Sri Ranjit Rai ji, and then Napalchalji, and then Satyadeep Chetriji. Let me start by reading out the formal introduction of Ranjit Rai ji, and then after that I'll invite him to present the backdrop of India-Nepal relationship and its current topicality. Mr. Ranjit Rai ji is Indian diplomat with 30 years of experience in Indian foreign services, which includes participation in the complex negotiation, both at the bilateral and the multilateral levels, and extensive work in the conflict area, crisis situations. Having started his career path in Vienna, where he acquired proficiency in German, he has since held various positions in the international state organization bodies, including the permanent mission of India to United Nations, to the UN. He has been a senior policy advisor to UN missions in Kosovo. Mr. Rai has worked close collaboration with US Assistant Secretary General within the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, DPKO. In his past role as Joint Secretary North at the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Rai was closely associated with the development of 12-point agreement signed in 2005 in New Delhi between the seven-party alliance of Nepal and the CPN Maoists. The pact initiated the peace process in Nepal, encouraged the Maoist rebels to join the peace process, and made the first Constituent Assembly elections a reality. Those efforts culminated in the Comprehensive Peace Treaty Agreement in 2006. Mr. Rai has served as ambassador to Hungary, with concurrent accreditation as ambassador to Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2006 to 2010, and then as ambassador of India to Vietnam, where he integrated the bilateral defense and trade cooperation. He was also a member of Commonwealth High-Level Group on Governance, established by Commonwealth heads of governments at the summit in Malta. Mr. Rai was ambassador of India to Nepal. Using his tenure, he revitalized the bilateral relationships to actively work on the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement with Nepal, political leaders, and their stakeholders. I welcome Dr. Rai. Could you please make your backdrop presentation for this topic? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rautela ji, and thank you for that very introduction. But let me say, it's a great pleasure for me to participate in this Value of Words forum. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and I'm glad that, given the fact that both Uttarakhand and, of course, Sikkim have a very close relationship with Nepal, I think it's a very appropriate topic for this forum. Now, I'd like to make a couple of points on the India-Nepal relationship, and then some reference to what is happening at the current point in time. So the first thing I want to say is that this is not a relationship that has been really formed by governments. This is a very ancient relationship, and the foundation of the relationship is the people-to-people interaction. As you know, we have open borders, document-free travel. So I think this is a fundamental aspect of the relationship one needs to remember. Secondly, I think we also have to be sensitive to how Nepal looks at India and the India-Nepal relationship. So, try and put yourself in the footsteps or in the shoes of a Nepali. So if you're sitting in Kathmandu and you look southwards, or you look to the east, or you look to the west, you have this large country that is surrounding you. This has a huge psychological and other impact on Nepalese national identity, on the concept of nationalism. Also, the fact that there are such close cultural, religious, and other affinities between the two countries. This also, has a very strong impact on the kind of self-identity that the Nepalese want to project. And I think amongst the Nepalese leadership, especially in the Kathmandu Valley, also the leftist parties, there's always an effort to demonstrate your national identity, not in terms of what is similar with India, but in terms of what is dissimilar with India. So, for instance, two markers for Nepal's identity are really the fact that Everest is in Nepal, or that Lord Buddha was born in Lumbini. And this is something, if you live in Nepal, you see how attached they are to these two aspects or attributes of nationality. So I think, we don't, as Indians, we shouldn't overstate the cultural and other similarities, because this tends to, detract from, how the Nepalese look at themselves. They really want to be independent. They want to be fully sovereign. And the third element that I want to say is that historically in Nepal, and especially after King Mahindra's coup in 1960, when he abolished multi-party democracy and brought in this party-less panchayat system, there has been, you can see the beginnings of this anti-Indian nationalism in Nepal. So, since this period, you have this effort, or you have this, thinking in Nepal that really, Nepal has to be wary of India and, define itself in non-Indian, or sort of in terms that are different from India. And secondly, also to balance India in some sense, or balance India's influence in Nepal in some sense, by turning towards China. So China has always been a balancing factor in the relationship between India and Nepal. And, the other thing, of course, is that Nepal is very dependent on India for its, trade, international trade, for its access to the rest of the world. So Nepal is always seeking to enlarge its strategic autonomy, its political space, basically in order to dilute this very, very strong dependence on India. So I think these are some factors that policymakers need to keep in mind. And I can illustrate what I'm saying by the recent issue with regard to the boundary. And that is something that I think Uttarakhand is very deeply involved in. And, this is the whole western boundary area where Nepal has basically engaged in cartographic aggression and assertion, and, virtually written 400 square kilometers of territory, of Indian territory, from Uttarakhand into its own map. And, I don't want to get into the evidence. I think India has a very strong case. We have enough evidence to justify our claims. And we can come to that later if people are interested. But what I'm trying to say is that this itself is also a reflection of this kind of anti-Indian nationalism in Nepal. You would recall last year, when India, following the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir, had brought out a new map in November of last year. The Nepalese had protested against this map on the grounds that it showed Kalapani, which is the source of the river Kali, or Sharda as it's known further down in the plains, as part of India, and they protested. And this ultimately led to this issue of a new map by Nepal and also a constitutional amendment. So, why did this become such a big issue? And the answer to that is that the government of the day in Nepal, Prime Minister KP Oli's government, was under a lot of domestic pressure, for the handling of the COVID crisis, for not handling the economic fallout properly, the question of, migrant labor of Nepal returning to India. He was unable to manage the other leaders within the Nepal Communist Party. So there were a lot of issues and he was under a lot of pressure. So this map issue became a godsend or a lifeline for the Prime Minister. And he basically picked on this issue to say that, look, India is, harming our interests. India is taking our territory, and, we cannot allow this. And so this precipitate action was taken basically to project himself as another, great nationalist leader who could stand up to India. And, that is this whole story of the revised map of Nepal. And, they have revised this map after 200 years. In the last 200 years, this has never been the map of Nepal. And at one go, with the pen, they have changed their boundary. And clearly, this is not acceptable to India. And, we have to find some way of, getting our relations back on an even keel. And I think the government has made some efforts. You would have seen that, the cabinet secretariat official visited Nepal recently. I'm not sure that I would have, strongly endorsed that via media for beginning talks with Nepal. But anyway, and following that, we've had a very successful visit of our army chief, who has just become an honorary general of the Nepalese army. And this is to be followed by the visit of our foreign secretary. So I think what we are now trying to do is really, to bring about a thaw in the relationship, and at least move, on other areas of the relationship, on less contentious areas of the relationship, on the political side, on the economic side, on the people-to-people side. So I think this is a very positive development. And the other aspect, I think, is that, if we can make the river Mahakali, instead of a contentious boundary, if we can make it a very friendly boundary river, from which both people benefit. And, in this context, I think there is renewed energy and a renewed push for the Pancheshwar multipurpose project, which is a 5,040 megawatt project. So I think if we can push this on the substantive side, I think this will really strengthen the relationship between the two countries. Now, on the specific boundary issue, what can we do? So the basic problem that we face, I think, in India is that, the Nepalese government has now gone ahead with a constitutional amendment with 2/3 majority in parliament. So if we negotiate with Nepal today, we need some sort of assurance that whatever settlement is agreed between the two countries will be endorsed by parliament. And this means that all the leaders of the major parties in parliament should agree that whatever settlement is arrived at between India and Nepal would be endorsed by parliament. We would not like a situation where we negotiate with Nepal and then the outcome of that negotiation is rejected by the Nepalese parliament. So I think this is a part of the dilemma that we face. And the last point I wanted to say is that, this boundary issue has come up at a very delicate time in our region. India and China are facing a huge standoff in the Ladakh sector. China has even made unfounded claims on Bhutanese territory in recent months. Again, there is talk of some Chinese activity in the Doklam area. So all these are matters of major concern to India. And at this time, Nepal raises the issue of the India-Nepal boundary in the Himalayan sector, which is a very important and very sensitive area. So, this I think has caused considerable unease, not only in government circles in India, but also amongst the public. And I think our media has played also a role in all this. So my, feeling for the first time, I'm a little disturbed that the people to people relationship between the two countries is being negatively impacted. And for the first time, I think the people of India are feeling very suspicious as to why Nepal is doing what it has been doing. So I think it's very important to really get our relations back on track and not allow the situation to deteriorate further. And I'm glad that the steps being taken by the government, are in this direction, and I hope they will bear fruit. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. I think what you're talking about people-to-people relationship is one of the key factors, I think, which will bring us back on track in terms of as allies in the context of our borders and also in the context of our disputes with China and other borders, which where the Nepal can also play a good ally as we can go along and discuss this. So I would now like to bring Napal Chalji into discussion. He comes from Dharchula. So I'll read out his brief bio before I invite him. Uh, Mr. Napalchal was born in Dharchula, district Pithoragarh, in 1950, and he is a member of Indian Administrative Services. He holds MA in English Literature degree from Allahabad University. He served as retired as the Chief Secretary of Government of Uttarakhand, and then he served as the Chief Advisor to Planning Commission in the state and Chief Information Commissioner, and as well as the Scheduled Tribe Commission Chairman of Uttarakhand. He has vast experience of administration, starting both in UP and Uttarakhand. He has handled departments like land revenue, disaster risk management, industries, textiles, handlooms, public works, finance, home, and transport. And his area of interest include reading, writing, traveling, community development. He's also founding member of our community organization from Dharchula called Ran Kalyan Sanstha. So I would like to invite Napal Charji to throw his even the personal experience in terms of our community relationship as far as the Indo-Nepal border is concerned, and as well as on the larger historical context also, and how we can go forward from here. We can look at the past, but how we can go forward from here. Napal Charji, please.
Thank you, Krishna. Good evening, my co-panelists. First of all, I would like to compliment the WOW as well as the RST Forum for curating this session on India-Nepal relations. This is the fittest tribute to Dr. R.S. Tolia, who was an eminent scholar administrator. And when this problem first came up, the government of India, the then government of UP, they had approached Dr. Tolia to study this problem, and he must have definitely made some report to the government of India then. That's what I believe. But unfortunately, the Gorkhas rule this part of India for about 25 years, and there is very scant literature or documentation done on that period. And our local universities, they have also not done much. But compared to that, I believe JNU has the Himalayan region study center under the School of International Studies, and they have done considerable work on this. So my feeling is that our universities in India, especially in the border states, should engage themselves in this kind of research. And this neglected period of 25 years needs to be relooked, because without that, I think we are groping in the dark as far as the historical perspective is concerned. What we have now is the Atkinson's volume, in the name of gazetteers, of Himalayan gazetteers, and beyond that, very little is available. Even the official exchanges between the East India Company and the Nepal Darbar, that is now not accessible to us. At least in our archives, it is not available. Mr. Rai would know that Mr. Edward Gardner, who was agent to the Nepal Darbar, immediately after the conclusion of the Treaty of Sugauli, he has written to the Nepal Darbar, rejected their claim to the Limpia, Dhura, and other areas which Nepal had subsequently claimed after they had taken the two villages of Changru and Pinkar. And it is based on the premise that Changru and Pinkar were given the Kali Nadi was supposed to be originating from Kalapani. And in my a few writings, I had also emphasized there are historical and mythological evidences to point to that. And recently I came across one more evidence which points that Kali Nadi originated from Kalapani. And this is from our Kav Puran. It is a sort of ritual Puran of our community in which a dead person is guided to the other world, and there is a fable or some sort of anecdote in that one prince was being chased by an angry god, and he had gone towards Chodai, and from there he went to Biak, and while trying to escape, he had taken shelter at Kalapani, and then crossed over to Lipulek and gone to Tibet. So there is a mention of Kali Nadi there, which had 9 streams, and it also fits with the mythological account of Skanda Puran in Manaskhand, where it is supposed to have fallen from the head of Lord Shiva. So these evidences are there. What is important is Nepal had, soon after the amending the map through the constitution, they had constituted one 9-member committee of experts, an expert group, and they are trying to put together a lot of evidences, but no such efforts seems to have been done by our government, by the government of India, and I very strongly feel that one interdisciplinary group should also be constituted by the government of India, in which the foreign relations experts, historians, and the cartographers or the Survey of India representatives, they should all be taken in, and they should also put together the various evidences, because after all, this deadlock is there. There seems to be some thaw in the relationship between the two countries, but this has to finally go to the table for negotiation, and there the hard facts, evidences would have to be produced by both the sides. Nepal seems to be very, very convinced that they have a very strong case. We are also convinced. What is required is we need to convince Nepal. So in order to convincing Nepal, we have to have solid evidences. And for that, I think a systematic study should be done, in which even the local evidences should be taken on board. So this does not seem to have been done by the government of India, and my suspicion is that even now the government of India is treating this problem as a very small problem or as a pinprick. And I think we are sadly mistaken, because Nepalese are now, as Mr. Rai was pointed out, the Nepalese which we used to think they were in the past. Recently, I came across one very good article by the former ambassador to Nepal, Mr. Manjeev Singh probably, in which he had written about the Nepalese moving from Banaras to Bangalore. I would add that Nepalese have moved to Boston, not to Bangalore alone. So they have gone far ahead. They are, they have a balancing power to the north, like China. And China has its own designs. They have ready access to the Prime Minister, and also through the free teaching of Mandarin as a language in their schools. I think they are indoctrinating the younger generation in Nepal. So that is a great cause of concern for us. As far as the people-to-people relationship is concerned, I think there has not been much change, except that this COVID pandemic has brought about a lot of restrictions. The access to each other's border areas have been restricted, and during the month of May, when the people of these two villages, Changru and Tingtar, were moving on their annual migration to their native villages, that time we had to make some effort to open the gate from the Nepalese side as well as from the Indian side. Now this is the time for them to come down for their winter sojourn in Darchula. Now even now there is some problem going on, and we'll have to again step in, trying to persuade both the governments, the local administration, to open the route as well as the gate on the bridge in Darchula. Now, I believe that I was referring to that 9-member expert group which Nepal has constituted. They have gathered some evidence, and in which they are claiming that these three villages of Kuti, Nadi, and Gunji, they were, counted during the census, and also they have participated in the first Panchayat election in 1959, and also they have the land records. So I believe that Nepal has been working very systematically, but it is not to be believed, because whatever evidence they would bring, because our villages, these three villages, and the rest of the other villages in the Beas region, in the Beas Patti, they have been going to Nepal during the winter season, and we had villages there in Nepal, in Dhuligada, Devthala, Varbakhya, and those villages were given, the land was given on lease to us. And we used to live there during winter season, and to facilitate our trade, local trade, and also to provide the access to the animals and cattle to the vast pasture lands in those villages. I suspect that Nepalese would have done their homework during that time of enumerating the people in the census during those years when they were there in those villages in Nepal. And also when the Panchayat elections took place, I also remember our people, apart from these three villages, they had participated in these elections. So that is what they are trying to put up as a proof that these three villages had even participated as citizens and taken part in the elections. But Nepal is on a very, very slippery ground on this because in 1984 or in the mid 80s, when Nepal had asked these three villages, Gunji, Kuti, and Nabi, people from these three villages, to choose either India or Nepal, or they will lose right to the land there in Nepal. At that time, all these three villages, including the other villages, they had rejected the Nepalese citizenship. They had crossed over to India, and after that, they never went back. And they sold their lands, whatever rights, limited rights they had there, sold the lands to the local people there, and they no longer go to those places. So if Nepal considered the citizens of these three villages as their own citizens, there was no occasion for them to ask them to choose between India and Nepal if they were already their citizens. So Nepal is on a very slippery ground, but we need to put together all these evidences, and it has to be put together very systematically. So I hope that Government of India would act on that. And as far as Nepalese media and some people, sections of press are concerned, they are launching all sort of propaganda, and recently the most serious one was that they were trying to lure the people of Gunji, Kuti, and Nabi by giving them money, land, and other allurements to be citizens of Nepal. And that propaganda was found to be totally false, unfounded. So this has been going on, and unless some conducive atmosphere is created for talks between the two countries, this kind of vitiation of atmosphere will go on. So I only hope that Government of India wakes up sooner than later and they come to the terms that they have to come up with the evidence. Sadly, our Survey of India, and especially the retired officers who could also come up, like the Nepalese Survey of India, Survey of Nepal retired officers are doing a lot of work. Our people seem to be totally oblivious of what is happening or what was their role during when they were in the service and what is their duty to the country. So I think that we need to think very hard about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Nabil. So, yes. So with that perspective, in the sense that how we at the kind of victims of the border issue, you call it, or somebody who has to face the brunt of it, Patyalji has presented that picture to you. I also come from the same area. We are a different valley just below, but that is not so far claimed by Nepal. So maybe we don't have the same issue in terms of proving our citizenship. But the issue is that we see it on a daily basis, that this border issue, and we have not seen it just now. We've seen it in the past, in 1980s, when the blockade had happened, and quite a few things have happened in the past. And we'll come to those issues also later. But what we tend to somehow, forget in this whole scenario is that India and Nepal is not just about the two countries, but also the Nepalese community, which not lives only in Nepal, but lives in India also. This may have happened for a larger set of population, thinking that the Gurkha soldiers have stayed back, or maybe those people who have come for work, they've stayed back. But it is the people who speak Nepalese or who are from the Nepalese community descendants are part of Indian citizenship, Indian states. That is something which is forgotten. And for that, I had invited Satyadeep Chhetri to also bring that perspective as to what happens when we talk about all these relationships. So before I invite him, I will read out his brief bio. Dr. Satyadeep Chhetri is an associate professor at Nar Bahadur Bhandari Degree College, previously known as Sikkim Government College in Gangtok. For past 20 years, he has PhD in chemistry, and his scientific work in national and international journals has been published. Apart from his professional life, he is very active in civil society in Gangtok. Presently, he is on the boards of two largest NGOs of Sikkim, ECOS and Sati. He's also a very active member of IMI, and he's a passionate science communicator, environmentalist, policy analyst, and avid quizzer. He has also been writing consistently on socio-political issues and has been columnist in the leading local English dailies like Sikkim Express, Sikkim Chronicle, and Himal South Asia. He also writes fiction, poetry, and has interest in the Gorkha issues also. So I'll request Satyadeep to bring not only just the issues regarding the border, but also this whole issue about how the Nepalese community feels about it when these issues come up. And also, of course, there are Gokhaland issues which may not be directly related, but you could throw light on that also. So Satyadeep, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm very thankful to Value of Words and the RST Forum for inviting me on this platform to share a stage with um, very notable figures of India. Basically, I am a Nepali by birth, and I speak the Nepali language. That means, but there's also another issue to it, and that is I'm an Indian. Uh, that's what I have to say, because I remember about 2 years back, the former chief minister of Sikkim, who was there for the last 25 years on the chair of the chief minister of Sikkim, had gone to Delhi, and someone had asked him that, "Aap kab aaye?" I mean, Nepal se kab aaye? So these are issues that the Indian Nepalis have always faced. These are issues where the Nepalis of India have started calling themselves Gorkhas post 1984-86. This huge revolution that happened across the boundaries of Sikkim in the Darjeeling Kalimpong Himalayas. So this is what we've been feeling, and this is what the identity pinch that has been continuously thrown on the Indian Nepalis for the last 100 years. Every time there are questions regarding the identity issues, as in, are you an Indian or are you a Nepali? As Nepali, as in Nepal Nepali, or are you in? So it's very interestingly that when the agitation took place, the Gorkhaland agitation took place in a huge scale, where almost 1,200 to 1,500 people lost their lives. This was this inflammation of this whole problem was because of the identity issue, and it still carries on till date. Secondly, I'm sitting in giving this talk from a place called Sikkim, where today, if we see the boundaries of Sikkim as a state or as a country before 1975, is an outcome of the Anglo-Nepal Treaty of 1816, the Sugauli Treaty. After 1816, what happened was, in 1817, the Treaty of Titalia was signed, and that was the time the large tract of areas between Mahanadi and Mechi was given back to Sikkim. The Nepalese army gave back to the British, and they handed it over to the king of Sikkim. That's the story. That means if we redraw our boundaries, this is also an outcome of the India, India as in concept at that time, but it is a fallout of this treaty that was signed in 1816, which Napchialji has even said that. I'm very happy that Ranjit Raiji has said a very interesting fact, and that is, it is people-to-people contact. Now, I recently, about a year back, I had gone to a place called Manebanjang, which is very close to Sikkim. It is on the border of India and Nepal, in the Darjeeling Hills, and I saw a lot of. I visited that place almost after 3 or 4 years, and post 2015, when the embargo happened and when there was a slight change in the Indo-Nepal, relationship. I saw a lot of SSB placed there, the Shasastra Seema Bal, right up to the point of Sandakphu, all across the line. And then we have now there is a jeepable road, but when we trekked to that place, I happened to meet, and these are like small treks where sometimes you are inside the Nepal border and sometimes you are in the Indian side. So you really don't know which side you are walking. These are small mountain trails. So when we reached there, and I met one Nepali family, and I was sitting with them and having tea. Of course, there's no border as such, as in a wired fenced border, but they were very unhappy with the presence of the SSB, saying that our relations no more remain the same. Now we have we have a gatekeeper right across our road, and I saw there was one SSB unit which was stationed just outside our house. I came out of Manebanjang and I started driving towards Mirik. And I'll tell you a story. That is, there are places where you keep your vehicle on the road, which is on the Indian side. Then you open the gates of your garden, and then you enter your house, which is in the Nepal side. And there are no fences to demarcate which side is India and which side is Nepal. So basically, what has happened is also the fact that the Nepali community in India, who've been staying there for 200 or 300 years, and I remember I quote my ex-chief minister, who had said in a big forum that when I was asked, like, when did you come to India, I said that I came with Lord Buddha. I mean, Ranjit Rai ji has mentioned that they are very strongly revere Buddha as being part of the biggest philosopher of their country. But what actually happens to us, we Nepalis in India, is that there is a constant conflict which is on. I mean, the conflict as in where do you belong to? Now, these are very, very important questions, and these are the yeah. Hello.
Is it better?
Hello.
I think we
Okay,
had some
can I
connection
continue?
issues. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
So,
Yeah,
so
please.
these are issues. Let us not. So again, I'm coming back to the people. Like every time today, if you see in India, there are more than about 1 to 1.5 million Nepali citizens in India. 1992, Nepali has been part of the 8th schedule of languages in India. That means it's a recognized national language of India, of the 24, 25 odd languages that's recognized by the government of India under the 8th schedule of the constitution. Today, if you see by language, there are about 30 lakh people who speak Nepali as a mother tongue. But then there are other offshoots like the Limbus, the Tamangs, the Rais, the Magars, the Gurungs. They have their own language. So when the language survey was happening, they've of course recorded themselves as Nepali not being their mother tongue, but they've said that, okay, right. But then when you bring it together, the whole galaxy of all the Nepali subcaste, it comes together as the Indian Nepali. So we are around about 60 to 70 lakhs. That's what overall figure says. And there are about 1 to 1.5 crores of Indians who actually speak the language. So even after that, every time there has been a problem of asking, where do you come from? So these are issues that has been plaguing the entire Indian Nepali community deep within. The second part, of course, has been the Indo-Nepal Treaty of 1950. The Peace and Friendship Treaty also has become a sore this one in the throat. What has happened actually is that because of this treaty, there are clause 7, which says that a Nepali citizen or an Indian citizen can move across borders freely and also buy land and property. So there are a lot of Nepali citizens in India, not only Nepali as in Nepali caste, but there are even Biharis and Marwaris and all these people who have both the Nagarikta of Nepal and of India because of their property and because of the trade and commerce that they've been doing in their respective countries. Now these has, but the problem what happens is there was never an issue with say a Bihari or a or a Marwari or any of the business communities that we're talking about who have been doing trade and commerce in both these countries. But it's always the Indian Nepalis who have faced the brunt, of where do you belong. So this question of where do you belong has a big ramification, and that was the issue where in 84 to 88, when the huge Gorkhaland Andolan happened, and which was supported by the entire Nepali community of India, who now call themselves actually Gorkhali. There is, I mean, they have, since we have a Gorkha regiment in India, so at that time they had to face something. They wanted to call themselves Bharpali, something like a Bharatiya Nepali types, but then it was it was not accepted. But then Gorkha sounded, it has always been there, and that is the region that the then leader of the Gorkhaland Andolan, Mr. Subhash Gising, said that okay, let's have coin this word called Gorkha, and let's start calling ourselves Gorkha. And if you see today, the Indian Nepalis have started calling them Gorkhali. They say that I am a Gorkha, but my language is Nepali, because that's what is there in the Constitution of India. So this identity issue has always been a problem for the Indian Nepalis or the Gorkhas that we are talking about, because of all these different issues that India and Nepal shares. And every time there is a conflict, people get, worried as what would be our state, because even after staying 300 years in this country, or 400 years, or let us say there are places like Darjeeling or parts of Sikkim were part of Nepal once upon a time. So the people have come with their land. That is what the people in mainland India do not try to understand. So this will continuously, trouble the entire. A generation was troubled, and a generation will be troubled. Just to finish my talk with a small anecdote or a real happening. In 1947, when India got independence, Darjeeling, everybody will be knowing Darjeeling because Darjeeling tea is very famous. Darjeeling municipality, which is one of the oldest municipality in India, 1850 it was established, Darjeeling municipality. It had the Pakistan flag flying on top. From 14th of April to 18th of April, the Pakistani flag was flying, because the people didn't know. They thought, okay, Bangladesh has gone East Pakistan, so we were part of the Rajshahi division or of the Bengal. So possibly Darjeeling has also gone with Pakistan, and the Pakistan flag fluttered for 4 days until someone had to come and tell them, come on, you are in India and let's put the Indian flag, So you can understand where all these thoughts are emanating. So thank you very much. We can take this discussion forward. Thank you very much. Krishna, you can take over.
Thank you, Satyadeep. Thank you for sharing these very interesting anecdotes. And I wanted to put some of these questions to Ranjit Rai, because this people-to-people relationship is something which we have talked about. We have talked about Nepali aspirations, ambitions, their own identity issue. And both, I can claim for three of us, those who have kind of a face which looks like Nepali, and those who have lived in the mainlands of India, we call it because the mainland. We've had this issue where I know I can sympathize with the Nepali as to why they would feel anti-Indian at times. Because we ourselves have faced this issue where you walk in the UP's Lucknow, Bajar, or Bareilly or somewhere, and you immediately get called Nepali or Bahadur, things like that. So, and when I had, I think, first time my privilege to go to Kathmandu, I realized as to how people would reciprocate to you in a certain way. And I think that has reflected over a period of time when democracy came and people had opportunity to express themselves. They did express, and those things are manifesting today. So how do we look at this people-to-people relationship, not just in terms of the, what we talk in terms of talks here and there, but actual people-to-people relationship? How do we start looking at Nepalese with respect, so that respect is then ultimately seen by Nepalese as a sign of friendship? So that is something that, I mean, because I've heard one of your talks in Sorbonne University also, you've had that kind of relationship with people where you'd have spoken to younger generation in Nepal. I really would like to hear more from you on this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much, Krishna. And I think it's a very good question. And, to me, the people-to-people relationship is the foundation of the relationship between the two countries. I think, this is the most ancient part of the relationship, even before the two countries were formed. And the government-to-government relationship, of course, is much later. The second point, and I think Satyadeep made this point about the SSB. So, we must understand, and especially our security forces must understand, that this is an open and a friendly border. The India-Nepal border is not like India-Pakistan border. It is not like India-Bangladesh border that is fenced. This is an open border, very, very friendly border. There is constant coming and going from each other's countries, for shopping, for anything. You have a marriage in your family in Nepal, you go to, the bazaars of Raxaul or Jogbani to do your shopping, and you come back. So it's a very open and friendly border. And, I think this is one huge problem, that the deployment of the border guarding forces, SSB on our side, and the armed police force on the other side, have sometimes caused a lot of problems for the people. And I think, here we're looking at security in a very narrow, constricted way. I think we should look at security in terms of mutual development along the border, in terms of the good relationship between the two communities on the border, in terms of good relationship between the intelligence communities on the border, because, sometimes the open border is misused by inimical third parties. So the solution to that is not to make the border less open, but to keep it open and strengthen your intelligence cooperation, police cooperation, to minimize the adverse linkages. Now, the third point, when I said there is this anti-Indian sentiment in Nepal, I want to qualify that. That sentiment is only amongst a certain section of the Kathmandu Valley. And traditionally, that used to be either the royalists, the monarchists, or the leftist forces. In the rest of the country, there is no anti-India sentiment. There is a lot of affection, lot of warmth, lot of friendly feeling at the level of the peoples. And last point, see, sometimes in India, even though Nepal is so close to India, you will be surprised. I meet so many people in Delhi who have traveled all over the world, and they have never been to Nepal. And their idea about Nepal comes from the Nepalese that they interact with in Delhi, so the labor class that is coming to work as, night watchmen, or as, domestic helpers and attendants. And that is why this feeling, every Nepali is a Bahadur. So there's a complete lack of understanding and sensitivity that, Nepal is a very diverse country. It has a very rich culture and traditions. So there is a huge gap, I think, in terms of knowledge and information. And one of the points I've been making is that, our universities should have research institutes, for Nepal, for our other neighboring countries. We know a lot about Biden, Trump, and what is happening in the USA, and we don't know anything about what is happening in our own neighborhood. So this is a big gap, and I think this really needs to be filled. So we need much greater awareness, understanding, travel, between the two sides, academic exchanges, parliamentary exchanges, youth exchanges. So, we really need to nurture this people-to-people relationship. Of course, it's very strong, but, if we don't keep working at it and trying to improve it and resolving the problems, a day may come when, we drift apart. And, that's not a very happy prospect. So we really need to work, to further strengthening this relationship.
Thank you, Raji. I mean, when you mentioned about SSB and also Satyadeep mentioned, I was reminded about the borders the way Europeans have amongst themselves, the countries. you wouldn't really feel. I mean, you people living in Geneva go to do shopping, their daily shopping in France, and they come back, and people live in France and they work in Geneva. I mean, this is just one of the examples, and how we can achieve something similar in Indo-Nepal border relationship is very important. And I would like to share that this is a fact that our border management, specifically by the security forces, needs to be improved not only for the Indo-Nepal or Nepalese side, but also Indian side. I've been, as a border person, I can tell you exactly how you would feel when you're treated as somebody not from your country just because of your looks, maybe at times, and the way the border security forces treat you. I think they need to have this friendly management training over a period of time to understand as to how to behave with people. And most of our border troubles come from that only, as to how people in mainland who are in security forces, they behave with the people at the border. So that is something which I think is aside from our Indo-Nepal relationship. I wanted to take this question to Napal Chalji about what Rai ji has mentioned about Pancheshwar Dam, and this is one of the key issues I think which could become a point where we can come together and maybe have reverse the dependence of Nepal and India, rather than India would be dependent on Nepal especially the energy resources issues, things like that. So, being from the area, having handled maybe Pancheshwar at different times during your administrative career also, I would like to know exactly how this is likely to be, and will it really be having a good relationship back for us, Pancheshwar issue? Napal Chalji?
This issue of development of hydroelectric energy and for water resources, it has had a very checkered history. And when the idea was first mooted, I think it was both India and Nepal that had welcomed it. But Nepal was besieged by this Maoist movement. At that time, there was a halt to it. After the new government came up, there was some progress, and Mr. Rai must have been there during those days in Nepal representing India. We came up with the agreement, and some mechanism was also developed. And one of that was a joint company was formed in which the Nepalese would be the CEO and Indian side would be the chairman, and his headquarters would be at Mahendranagar. And a lot of survey work had also commenced, and people had, of course, their own misgivings about area that was to be submerged on the Nepalese side as well as on the Indian side. So that is always there whenever there is a very big hydroelectric project is conceived. And in this case, it's a really big one, as Mr. Rai was saying. It is about 5,000 megawatt project. So it's a really big one, and takes up the entire area from the Tarai up to the foothills and even beyond Pithoragarh, and it reaches Jaljibi. So a vast area is to be submerged. Now, both India and Nepal may be keen on the project, but we don't now see there's a lot of uncertainty after this, tension between India and Nepal on the boundary issue. There seems to have been a total halt on the project, and it needs to be re-energized, needs to be given a proper traction. That is what both India and Nepal, when they are bilaterally they are meeting, when the foreign secretary level talks take place, it should be one of the major points on the agenda. And it would benefit both India and Nepal. And according to some, it would benefit Nepal more, because their investment is not that much as the entire amount or the major share has to be borne by India as far as the investment is concerned. So we really hope that once the talks start, the atmosphere becomes conducive, this would be taken up. I would like to add one more aspect to this discussion, that is the strategic and the security aspect on the border. I had an occasion to read an article by Mr. Kanatmani Dikshit, who is a very well respected journalist from Nepal, who was earlier editing Himal. I don't know whether he is still editing it. There was some shadow over it in the past. Now, he had formulated uh, a principle saying that in any case, this Limpiadhura, Lipulek area is to be given to Nepal. They are very much convinced. They have very strong evidence. That's what they think. And in that event, he suggests that the entire area should be demilitarized and it should be declared as a pilgrim zone for both India and Nepal, while it remains part of Nepal. That is the very fantastic formulation that he has suggested. And recently there has been one disturbing development, that is there has been a report of road being constructed from Changru up to Tinker and Tinker Pass. Now, Nepal, Tibet has already, China has already built roads on their side. Once this from Tinker Pass to Changru is connected, then we are really exposed to China. And if the formulation that Mr. Dikshit, I only hope that he has not done it on someone else's prompting. If that has to be taken on in principle or as a hypothesis, even hypothetically, now what happens? In that case, the area gets demilitarized, entire area is exposed to China, and China on the Tibet side, they are only about 15-20 kilometers away from Lipulek. Now they are building strong infrastructure there, and up to Lhasa, I think they are going to make a missile launching pad, and in the part of Taklakot, Tibet also they are stationing at least a division strength level of army, Chinese PLA. So these strategic considerations, they should not be lost sight of, because if you only think it as an issue of boundary with Nepal, I think it would be a very short-sighted view. We have to think it in a larger context. And when China is so much close to the border from the Tinker side, from the Lipulek side, this opens up an entire issue of strategic management on the border. So this also has to be taken care of by our policymakers or strategic thinkers in Delhi when they talk about Kalapani or Limpiadhura or Lipulek. Now, very interestingly, and it's very strange on the part of Nepal that they had only asked for Kalapani earlier, which was about 35 square kilometers. And for the first time, as Mr. Rai was also pointing out, they are now claiming over 300 kilometers, 375 square kilometers of land. For the first time, they are doing it. Now, the reason as to why they are doing this kind of thing, after they have sat over for so long, and this they were only claiming 35 square kilometers of land around Kalapani, including Kalapani. Why they are now claiming that Limpiadhura is the point from where Kali Nadi originates, and the entire area east of Kali Nadi, or the Kutiyangti, our Kutiyangti, should now be given to Nepal. That is a very dangerous, formulation from the point of view of strategy, from the point of view of our own defense, and this should not be lost sight of. And while taking up issues with Nepal, I think this concern should be voiced with them because we are totally exposed after that. Even building road from Tinker Pass to Thangru, that exposes our entire defense line. From there, Garbyang, just across the river. So this should be very, very dangerous for India. And I hope that our security experts, our defense personnel at the higher level, and our external affairs people, they are cognizant of this fact, and they would take cognizance of this while taking up the issue with Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you, Napal Jalji. I think, maybe are running out of time. So I would like to ask Satyadeep that we mentioned that the problems Nepalese in India face, but I think improving of India-Nepal relationship also would be one key aspect of, as to how Nepalese in India would see a future in terms of their own identity. So I would like to ask you, so what do you think will be a way forward for on the border issue, on what how government of India and government of Nepal will deal, but as to how Nepalese community in India would deal with this? What do you think? How we should go forward with that?
Uh, Before I answer your question, just briefly, I would like to bring forth the issue of the Chicken Neck region, which is a small strip of land of about 22 kilometers wide and about 60 kilometers long. That is the Chicken Neck region. That's a small region of India in between Nepal and Bangladesh, and that is the strategic location. If you see Doklam and all these issues that's happening in the Indo-China border, it's just a stone's throw away. So we wouldn't like to have any type of adverse relationship with Nepal, whereas this Chicken Neck region gets problematic, and especially with the Gorkhaland issue. And if you look at it's been too long that a permanent political solution has not. The government of India has been saying it again and again. Some type of recognition to the community, saying that look, whenever a person comes, say from a Tamil Nadu or a Maharashtra or a Bengal or Assam, they are branded as an Assamese or a Bihar from a Bihar will be a Bihari, a Bengal from Bengali. But with India, this problem was never there with, say, with a Bangladeshi and a Bengal, because there is a clear-cut boundary demarcation. There is a whole, fenced border between the two countries, and the dynamics are different. But it's not so with Nepal. So it's as Ranjit Rai ji has also been saying that the people-to-people contact is very, very important. That's number one. And number two is the recognition of some way, this entire region of North Bengal, say from the Chicken Neck region above, Darjeeling, Kalimpong, Jalpaiguri, Kuch Bihar, there's a belt of, say, Kamtapur movement, the Bodoland Andolan, the Gorkhaland Andolan. It's a small area, and you cannot keep this area fragile. And it's just the other side, you have a huge China looking at you. These are problems. These are problems which will be faced. And the more you keep it, let's take, for example, Darjeeling. Nakchialji has said that they are, let's say, declare that area as a pilgrimage region. But this is exactly the problem with the Darjeeling people have faced. Darjeeling and Kalimpong. Sometimes it was called an absorbed state. Sometimes it was called a left out place. Sometimes it was called a backtracked region. There was, so there were different zones that has been excluded area. So these were areas right from, say, from the British India, say from 1889, 87, 88, 89. When the partition of Bengal happened in 1906, Darjeeling was so important for the British that they moved it from the Rajshahi division. They moved it into the what do you call that in Bihar? The division that was in Bihar, they had shifted it over there. Now, so there has always been a shift in dynamics. So the only thing that the entire community in India wants is some type of recognition. They had said a BGAC which did not work, an autonomous council, a GTA which does not work. And it's not that key. Why is this region important for the entire Gorkha community? Is it because only the Gorkha community stay here? No, it isn't. What is important is that this is the region where the region was carved out of Nepal by British. And the people have been part of that land That means they came to India with the land. They became part of India with the land. So this has never been a problem for the others. They had this 1947 to 1950 where they could join, mergers happened. So, the royalties, the princely states joined, but it was never with Darjeeling. It was left abandoned till almost 1954-56. Till they were aligned to Bengal. I think that this is part of it. So it cannot go on like this, and and considering the importance, the geopolitical importance of this region, also for the benefit of India, because once you clip the chicken neck, the entire northeast gets disconnected. Uh, if you look at the region that way. So my only contention is, let's hope there is a permanent political solution. There is something that people, and there is also a movement in the social media, in the newspapers, media. They create a lot of problems. They should be actually now creating a narrative saying that, look, these guys are part of India. They are Indians. They are not like tum kab aaye Nepal se. That narrative has to end as fast as possible. Yeah, thank you, Krishna.
Thank you, Satyadeep. So, we had started with Ranjit Daiji, and I would like to, I think, finish with your summing up statement in a way, because you've heard us, Satyadeep, maybe for the first time, the East View has come into your account of this whole Indo-Nepal relationship discussion which we're having now. So, the fact that both have hard stances today, and they've taken stances which they're very irrecoverable sort of a thing. So, what is because I asked about the Pancheshwar Dam, thinking that that could be a bargaining chip for for both parties to talk about reconciliation on this issue. So, what do you think would be a possible way of actually bringing about resolution of this problem, which we have created ourselves now? And if you could sum it up for us for today's discussion.
I thought the summing up is something that you would do, but
anyway.
But the only thing I want to say is that India is a factor in domestic politics of Nepal. So that is something we have to keep into account. So when we look at India-Nepal issues, it's you can't just look at them in isolation. You have to look at them in terms of how they play out in terms of the domestic politics of Nepal. And secondly, I think, as Napal Chalji has made a very important point, we should also look at the wider strategic dimension, where we have a very aggressive China, which is actually now very aggressive in our own region, and especially in the Himalayan region. So clearly, any strategy that we fashion with Nepal, Nepal is very keen to revise the 1950 treaty, for instance, which we are prepared to do. But clearly, the treaty has to be a balance of interests of Nepal and India. And for us, the security interest is very, very significant, given the very strong presence of China. And on Satyadeep's point, I really think, this is a very valid point. I don't know if you're familiar with the Madhesis of Nepal. They all complain all the time that in Nepal, people ask them, "Acha, aap India se kab aaye?" And you're saying Indians ask, Indians ask the Nepalese in India, "Aap Nepal se kab aaye?" So there is so much ignorance. The Madhesis of Nepal are exactly like the Nepalese of India. They went to Nepal with their land. They have always been living on their land. It's with Sugauli Treaty that the boundaries got demarcated. Some people found themselves on this side, some on that side. But this is something very difficult. Politicians in Delhi, for instance, when they meet somebody with a name like Mahato, or Thakur from Nepal, the first question they say is, "Acha, to aap India se kab gaye Nepal?" So, there is this huge lack of understanding. And I think this can only be overcome, by sort of, as you're saying, social media is very active today. So we need to really launch an education campaign that the Nepalese of Darjeeling, the Nepalese of Sikkim, they're as much Indian as any Indian in the rest of the country. And, I think social media, as you said, the narrative needs to change. So clearly, this is something we need to work on. And the sooner we work on it, I think the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit Raji. I asked you to sum it up in the sense that as to what we can look forward to. But I think my key takeaways from this discussion are this people-to-people relationship, which needs to be worked upon. Looking at respectable, balanced relationship from the Nepalese side, that also seems to be very, very important now. That if we need to gain their trust, and also definitely there is a time to look at the old treaties that see as to how it can be a balanced approach for future. So I would like to thank you all the panelists for taking part in today's discussion and enlightening us with their views. And also I would like to thank our team in UCOST, Piyush and others who have helped us to hold this recording today, and this craft team also, and the all the VOW staff and the organizing team. We thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to have this discussion. Definitely, we would like to hear more from all the panelists at some point of time in future. Let's see if we get the opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you.